Hearty welcome to another edition of the program Familiarize with the Law, coming to you from Star Television. We broadcast live from our Media One Center, 3 Member Springbok Fields in Freetown. My guest in today's edition of the program is the Deputy Minister of Information and Communication, Lawyer Solomon Jamiru. Jamiru, good day and welcome to the program.
Thank you, as always, Abdurrahman. Thank you.
You recall recently where you had to be on a panel in Dakar, Morocco, where you spoke on digital transformation. In one of your deliveries, you said the human capital development is the fulcrum of government blueprints, especially so when the National Development Plan was launched. And there has been so many talk around the effectiveness of the internet penetration. And you went further to reiterate the fact that there is now a predictable environment for onward competition into the telecom industry. Before we come to look at other different sectors where you've clocked a year now in governance as of days, let's begin to look at this very important issue where you represented the country at Dakar in Morocco.
Again, thank you. As we recap, yes, I was in Dakar in Morocco. At the same time, President Bio was in Casablanca for the Global Forum. And, it was a good time to be in Dakar because within the range of issues discussed, we also found time to be on the panel to talk about digital transformation in Africa. And I was in a position to share our Sierra Leonean experience, but also to challenge within the broader spectrum of things, to challenge the whole of Africa that we missed out on the previous industrial revolutions. So concerning the fourth revolution, Africa has to make sure that it is not left behind. And so yes, digital transformation is very key, and little wonder why President Julius Maada Bio has been very clear that if Sierra Leone has to take a giant leap forward, if Sierra Leone has to catch up with the rest of the world, we have to embrace ICT. And so as we talk about ICT, we'll talk about telecoms, we'll talk about internet penetration. You rightly said it's unpardonably low, and that's largely driven by mobile platforms. So as a government, we said, how do we resolve this issue? How do we ensure that we widen and deepen connectivity? So we are looking at policy, we are looking at infrastructure, and we are looking at operationalizing the two. So with respect to policy, again, I was in Bo the past weekend, where I joined the management and staff of the National Telecommunications Commission at a retreat. So we looked at the review of the Telecommunications Act of 2006. We looked at other policy issues. We looked at infrastructure. What do we do in terms of re-engineering the entire commission? What do we do to broaden internet penetration from its abysmal 16 to 20%? What do we do in terms of having a very predictable environment, so that if somebody who is sitting in the comfort of his home in Australia could just look at the NatCom website and have an idea that, this is what it takes to have a spectrum. So if I am in breach of this license, this is what may be the penalty. So the atmosphere is predictable. I mean, Abdurrahman, you know that one of the disincentives that the mobile network operators have been raising as a concern is the fact that some or most of the fines that were imposed were apparently arbitrary. And that concern has been validated in the special audit report. So it's important that we look at policy. It's important we look at the legal and regulatory framework. It's important we look at infrastructure. But one of the key things that government has done is the Universal Access Development Fund, as established under Section 13 of the Telecoms Act. That is the fund into which mobile network operators, ISPs, etc. must make a statutory contribution, a fee, a percentage to be prescribed by the Minister of Information and Communications, paid out of their gross annual earnings. So we have taken that to Cabinet. Cabinet has given an approval, and very soon the statutory instrument will be laid in Parliament. So once those mobile network operators, ISPs, are making that annual statutory contribution into the fund, those monies will now be used to ensure that we do rural connectivity. We do connectivity in unserved and underserved areas. But also within the broader framework, we know we now have the Directorate for Science, Technology and Innovation. When the delegation was in the United States, for example, DSTV signed an MOU with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. JALA signed an MOU with MIT. Harvard is also looking at cooperation with Sierra Leone. So it's very important, and I think it's an interesting moment to be in the ICT environment, because Abdulrahman, by the time we talk about the end of this year, things should have changed with respect to ICT. 1 year, if we have to sit here.
Mr. Minister, I take you back to your words where you reiterated the fact that as a government we've been approaching the internet aspect in a rather haphazard way.
That is true. That is true.
How do you intend to actually harness the synergy in getting it?
That is true. So again, if we go back to telecoms, yes, we have mobile network operators, yes, we have NATCOM. But if the regulatory environment was not thorough enough to address the issues, you would seem to be doing much, but your much is not good enough. So it's the same thing for internet. So for us as a ministry, we have taken the position that we have to look at a national broadband strategy. So the national broadband strategy should be able to give us a clear roadmap, a clear blueprint as to what the picture is for internet penetration, for example. So we know what the role of how does UADF fit in terms of rural connectivity, underserved and unserved areas. What do we expect from mobile network operators? What are some of the standards that we have to look at when we talk about broadband strategy? So once we have that strategy, across the board, who fits into where, what is to be done, what is the standard to which everybody has to be held accountable. And I say this, that there has been a lack of a national broadband strategy. So even if we're now trying to deepen and broaden internet connectivity, in the absence of a national broadband strategy, I think that could be a very serious debilitating factor. So yes, we are now looking at a national broadband strategy, and soon we should be able to complete and launch that one.
Mr. Minister, let's look generally as the government under His Excellency the President clocks a year and some days. There has been some mixed reactions, depending to who you talk to. They would tell you, irrespective of the strides made by the current administration, yes, still the economic crunch seemed to have overshadowed the very effort of this current administration. I recall a situation where in their assessment campaign for good governance, they issued a press release calling for specific improvements in certain sectors, like the parliamentary procedures, like the equal distribution of resources, not only concentrating it in some specific areas. The ordinary man's view about the current administration is telling you, of course, the word all over now is the ground dry. Is the government actually pretty much insensitive to economic situation currently in the country, leaning in developing the other sectors like the growth in agriculture or international foreign relationship now seem to have been dipped into a point where everybody seems to be attracted coming to the country. The environment of doing business. Yesterday we saw where a delegation from the United Arab Emirates visited His Excellency, paid a visit to His Excellency in return, trying to harness the doing business in the country. But still, these are not the things that actually the layman really wants to know. How can some of these development trajectories translate into the economic livelihood of the lay individual?
Thank you, Abdurrahman. That's a very crucial issue. That's a very important issue. That touches on the survival of our people. It touches on our well-being, and it's a very serious indicator if Sierra Leone has to be assessed and where it sits in terms of meeting our SDGs, in terms of meeting our African Union Vision 2063, etc., etc. Abdurrahman, as a government, we have had two key strategic retreats as a government. Presidency, vice presidency, all ministers, permanent secretaries, and professional heads. The first one was the retreat we had at Toke, where, as a government, we looked at the many areas of interest, but we decided that we have to narrow down on what we called our key government priorities. And then we had the second retreat at the Bintumani Hotel, again to see what our honest assessment is on where we are. That was before our first anniversary. And I will tell you that all of those priority areas have co-equal importance, from education to health, agriculture to economy, accountability and transparency, within which we have the fight against corruption, etc., etc., tourism and ICT. All of those issues have co-equal importance, and the economy is not an exception. You know, when we have to provide our assessment or our analytics on what the complexion of our economy is at this point, I entreat everybody for us to approach that discourse within a range of three key pillars. One, where we started off as a government. Two, where we are. And three, what do we expect in the immediate short term, medium and long term. So in terms of where we started off as a government, it's an open secret. I mean, the economy was in a pretty bad shape, with a foreign debt of about 1.6 billion United States dollars, domestic debts over 500 million United States dollars. Sierra Leone referred to as the third hungriest country in the world. Electricity, we all know at the time of the elections and after the election, people were asking, will not they see light too? All of that was difficult to handle. Inflation, prices going up, exchange rate between the US and the Leone. And so it was, we were in shark-infested waters. And it's been very, very difficult in trying to extricate ourselves as a country. But President Bio is a very resilient person. And so if we have to assess what the 1 year is, you may say, yes, we may not have delivered 100%, but if you judge us on the basis of the essential critical steps that this government has taken, a reasonable man would say, if they have started taking these initial steps, they are in the right direction. And so with respect to the economy, which is the specific area you want me to talk about, first let's look at electricity. We were off to a very rocky start, Abdurrahman, to the point that, you know, some people got so worried that, how do we resolve this? But today, with the 30 megawatts electricity supply to Freetown through the Turkish power ship, Tanja Sise is now launching the extension of that project to the east and the immediate outskirts, for example, for Freetown. Talking about renewable energy for the provincial areas. We still have challenges in Bo and Kenema, and as a government we're trying to address them. And that demonstrates that we are lending unequivocal commitment to electricity generation and supply. And so with Freetown, I mean, people would say, for the subsistence of the dry season, at least this government has been able to sustain reasonable supply of electricity. Which means if that person there where they sell cold water, for example, they get for the coal in fridge, you get for the coal in drinks, that person is assured that at least I will have my cold drinks, my cold water to sell.
So, Minister, the argument.
So that's just one aspect of the economy. But let's also look at what our donor partners, our development partners have been saying. Sierra Leone, if you really have to get it right, look at revenue generation. Please ensure that there is no fiscal recklessness. So in resolving those two issues,
that is prudent financial spending.
Prudent financial spending and management. And the records are that we have not been getting it right. That is why IMF disengaged. So in terms of revenue generation, we have been able to scale up from about 12.6% of our GDP now to 14.1%. Monthly accruals from about 192 billion a month to now an average of about 339 billion and more a month. Which means, with these important critical steps, government is able to bolster its position, to be paying off its debts. Again, I go back, we met about 1.5 or 1.6 billion United States dollars foreign debts, over 500 million United States dollars domestic debt. We have to be providing goods and services and at the same time trying to offset those indebtedness. And look at the moratorium, look at the several executive orders that President Bio issued. So in terms of the economy, yes, we may not be where we're actually anticipating to be, but with respect to those issues relating to revenue generation, fiscal discipline, it means we are taking the right direction. We are in the right trajectory. So for people who say bread and butter issue, yes, as a government we acknowledge that we have the bread and butter issue. And we're going to ensure that we approach this bread and issue from the point of view of reciprocity. What do I mean by reciprocity? The government of Sierra Leone making sure that it takes the necessary steps that will ensure that the necessary conditions for economic growth are actually satisfied and implemented, established, but also making sure that for our folks, our compatriots, for some of us who have trained in skills, for some of us who believe that we can start our businesses as entrepreneurs, we may not necessarily have to wait for government to provide the employment for us. So we are looking at all of those issues. As a government, we are making sure that we do everything it takes to have the necessary conditions for economic development. We are also looking at issues like credit. The ordinary Sierra Leonean who may want to start as an entrepreneur is looking at how he accesses credit. He goes to a commercial bank, for example. The interest rate is about 20% or thereabout, or more. If that person is able to attract some kind of facility with that kind of interest rate, how do you compete for somebody who comes from another country with 5% interest rate or zero interest rate? As a government, we are aware. We are looking at that bigger picture. We will get to that position, but it's important that we take the initial critical steps, revenue generation. We shoot up our revenue generation. We make sure that we embrace fiscal discipline. Once we are able to get that right, and President Bio's anticipation is that we benchmark ourselves at about 20% of GDP. Once we are able to do that, it means as a government, as a country, we'll be able to handle a lot of things economically without necessarily depending on the donors. And we are also looking at agriculture with the interventions that have started happening and with people that are here. Yesterday, the government received the delegation from the United Arab Emirates. So with all of that put into one context, yes, we may not be where we're anticipating to be as a government. We may not be where some people think, the bread and butter issue are resolved. But I will tell you that for the initial critical steps that we are taking, it means we are heading to the right direction.
Mr. Minister, those are very splendid ideas that you've just outlined. But perhaps the question that readily comes to mind, why are we deep into this economic challenge? When you look at the depreciation of the yuan as opposed to the dollar, during the last administration, it did not go up to something like 900. What is really wrong with the economist? What is really wrong with the Minister of Finance? What is really wrong with the coordination policy between the fiscal and the monitoring policies put together that could assuage all of these problems? Now, what is really happening? how can the government engage in some quick fix programs? Because what you've highlighted as to what the ambitious program of the government is, these are long-term and medium-term plans. What could be the quick fix solution that will cushion the effects of the economic crunch?
Thank you. Normally when I'm involved in a discourse of this nature, I don't normally fancy getting down the comparative analysis, trying to look at what this government is doing as against what the past government was doing, because some people may want to interpret it as okay, and sometimes you get yourself unnecessarily embroiled in some political discourse, and which may not help the debate. But as you said, yes, the last administration, under the last administration, the rate did not go as far as 900 or 9,000. But then the question I would want to ask is, why is it that at the rate that Ahmad Tijan Kaba left it, why is it that it was never maintained at that rate, but it still went so much up? You see, there are variables. Abdurrahman, I am not an economist and I am not a student of economics, but there are some essential and fundamental principles that we can establish some consensus on. There are some variables that may not necessarily be within the control of government or the political leadership. But I think it's important that government takes the bold and transformative steps to fix the economy. It's our responsibility to ensure that we look at the economy and provide the necessary enabling environment, first for our citizens, the ordinary people, but also for business people and also the investors, domestic and foreign. And government is taking those initial steps. For example, one of the issues I know that the governor of the central bank will be looking at is how do we formalize, for example, those who are involved in the exchange rate business. You walk along the streets of Freetown, sometimes people just run after your vehicle because they just assume anything that is driving, with the glasses of the vehicle right up, with the window right up, this person is out here to look for, some exchange. So how, for example, do we formalize them and get them into a properly centralized, formulated bureau system that links with the central bank, something that's in line with modernization, that is in line with international benchmarks? And how do we ensure that there is this synergy between the central government and those who are involved in the exchange rate? You see, no matter what you say, Abdurrahman, those people, even if they are in the streets, they have been supporting the economy one way or the other. It may not be the most ideal thing to do. I know, yes, a lot of them have been taking advantage of the system and exploiting Sierra Leoneans, I am aware. A lot of them have been doing some things beyond the necessary justifiable margins, yes, I am aware. But broadly speaking, they have also been servicing the economy, and they have been an important instrument. So first of all, government has to acknowledge that. But then how do we go over and beyond that point to ensure that that particular ambit of the economic system, economic framework, is also regularized and formalized? And I believe that the governor of the Bank of Sierra Leone is formulating the next critical steps towards that direction. How do we also make sure that we support indigenous business? How do we strengthen SMEs, small and medium enterprises? All of those things are on the table. So when I started off by talking about revenue generation, now Sierra Leoneans would see exactly where I was heading. As a country that broke away from the yoke of colonialism and we attained independence in 1991, it is very important that we have a radical departure from this import dependency and this over dependency on donor funding. And the only way we can do that, the only way we can get off the yoke of donor dependency is when we generate so much revenue internally. What NRA is doing, for example, now we have moved upwards from about 12.6% of the GDP to about 14.1%. So what the international, the development partners will now be doing, World Bank has decided to scale up its support to about 327 or 329 million United States dollars. IMF has come back to engage us because they say, based on your fiscal probity, based on probity in terms of spending, based on your track record of domestic revenue, based on the fight against corruption, we think that Sierra Leone is a country to do business with. MCC said to President Bio, looking at what you have done, less than 1 year, we are willing to put all the resources at your disposal to ensure that Sierra Leone becomes eligible for the MCC package. So when we look at all of that, and President Bio has said, let's look at revenue generation very well. If we are able to generate so much revenue that we hit about 20% of the gross domestic product, Sierra Leone will be able to service so much, pay all our salaries, service our debts, provide goods and services, do the roads as we are doing, provide electricity and water as we are doing, and support indigenous business. Until we are able to generate so much locally, it will be difficult. But before we get to that, in the short and medium term, President Bio is very committed to how do we cushion the effect on the ordinary Sierra Leonean with respect to the inflationary pressures. So looking at the short term, now we're looking at some of the support that will be coming from our development partners. Let's see how we could infuse those ones into the economic dynamics as you have pointed out. So at least we start fixing up things like exchange rate, we start looking at prices. How do we ensure that prices, for example, we look at prices without necessarily interfering with the interplay of demand and supply. So all of those things are very important. And Abdurrahman, I will assure you, there is no minister of government that will not think about the economy as a legitimate concern. President Bio believes that the economy is the basis of the superstructure. We cannot relegate it to a position of secondary importance. It deserves and will always get the unrivaled attention of government. So in terms of the critical steps that we are taking, yes, we may not be there 100%, but in terms of judging us, Sierra Leoneans would say, if they have started taking these bold and transformative steps, it means given time, 1 year from now, 6 months from now, 3 months from now, we should be able to see some changes in the economic outlook. Sorry, as I said, I have to put up with this, the slight cold that I have, but I'm sure I'll be able to keep up for the duration of the program.
Yeah, Mr. Minister, let's look from a broader perspective now. His Excellency recently launched the National Development Plan, which is a compilation of the various components of the development agenda mapped out as a nation for the immediate and long-term goals of the country's development aspiration. Now, the indication now is that they are segmented into clusters, for which the aspect of good governance is one of the key 8 clusters. And when I look at the key targets, it says by 2023, the level of public trust in state institutions is significantly improved compared to 2018. By 2023, about 50% of adult population expressed satisfaction that state institutions are functioning better than in 2018. By 2023, create a favorable space for human rights organizations to effectively promote transparency and accountability in an unfettered manner. By 2023, it will be able to create a citizen bureau that will meet annually with public authorities to review a wide range of issues stemming from the previous 12 months. How important is this national development plan in changing the entire political narrative?
No country functions effectively without a plan. No country would be able to generate developmental achievements without a plan. And when you look at some of the bold and transformative developmental efforts other countries in Africa have taken, we have no excuse. We have no reason why Sierra Leone could not take bold and transformative steps. So having the National Development Plan, dubbed the Medium-Term Development Plan, aka Education for Development, is very important. It is a step in the right direction. And for the first time, Sierra Leone has been able to put together a development plan 100% funded by the government, funded by the people of Sierra Leone. The agenda for change, the agenda for prosperity, they were not funded by government. For the first time, government has 100% funded its own national development plan. So when you do something like that, even the donors would say, it's an admirable step. It means you are demonstrating ownership. It means you are not prepared to cede control to development partners. It means you want to own the process from stage one to the last moment. So that is one. Secondly, you know that the National Development Plan 2018 to 2023 is the cost is 8.6 or 8.1 billion United States dollars. Government would provide part of that funds, but would also have to rely on development partners, extensively so. So it's important. So the National Development Plan is one critical step. You know, we have clusters and sub-clusters. And for the first time, it appears, we have been able to mainstream women's issues and disability issues to stand out, give them so much profound and significant prominence, so that at one glance, you know what government's focus is with respect to disability. You know what government's focus is with respect to empowering women. We know what government's anticipation is with respect to the youth. So the National Development Plan, I'm sure you were at the launch at Bintumani. It's so clear, it's so unequivocal, and government did everything. It was widely consultative. So having a plan like that emanates from a wider context of consultation, locally and internationally, and having a plan that is 100% funded by government, it sends the signal to development partners that this government means business. This government does not want to cede control to anybody. Don't come here to dictate to us what you want done. We want to dictate to you what our priorities are. And those priorities are thoroughly captured in the National Development Plan. So yes, the National Development Plan is an essential and important step, and government is now looking at implementing the plan to the letter, so that we are in a position to deliver on the key pledges that we have made and those critical clusters and sub-clusters that are captured in the plan.
I'm looking at a key policy imperative which spells out very clearly, especially so on the governance and accountability for results. Talks about the establishment of a Peace and National Cohesion Commission that will build and promote national cohesion, foster national identity, inculcate a national philosophy and ideology, and encourage continuous dialogue on national cohesion. This may sound rather splendid conception, but when you look at the polarization, the regional divide, which has taken a center stage, how to bring those different segments together, putting them for a comprehensive national cohesion, where somebody would tell you, I will not deviate from the ideology of my party, irrespective of what. I remain to be SLP, I remain to be APC, and attempt to bridge that gap of political difference could be a critical challenge. How is the government really approaching this aspect of peace and cohesion? I'm aware that there are wider consultation now being for which the process has been led by no less a ministry, the Minister of Political Affairs. The Minister of Political Affairs and his deputy, Amara Kano, they are doing a very fantastic job in that regard. But this is key for the growth and development of this country, Mr. Minister.
Abdurrahman, peace is important, national cohesion is important. We will not have any president in this country to toy with national cohesion. Any president who says that I don't want a cohesive society, any president who would say I have all the ideas, I can fix this country up all alone, you are paying lip service. You're paying lip service to good governance. You're paying lip service to what democracy is. And President Bio is very committed to a national and a cohesive society. The motto of the Sierra Leone People's Party is one people, one country. One country, one people. And he cannot shy away from it. And he has reiterated that commitment through the length and breadth of his governance processes. He has made those statements domestically, he's made those statements internationally. He cannot shy away from them. And I support his efforts towards building a cohesive society. You know, after his incarceration at Robben Island, when he came out of Robben Island, Nelson Mandela envisioned a rainbow society. He had a million, perhaps a billion reasons or justifications why it would have been tit for tat. He had a million reasons why he would have said, you know what, let's get rid of the white people. We no longer need them in our society. But he said, I'll rather have a rainbow society. Have the whites, have the colored, have the blacks. And today, some people in the African National Congress are saying the ANC has departed from the culture, from the vision of Nelson Mandela. There are governance challenges all over the world. But President Bio, even at the point when, after he was declared the winner of the last presidential elections, and he was paid a visit by members of the All People's Congress, both parties agreed to set up a bipartisan framework for peace, to go around the country and see how we could ensure that to build the bridge. We can only solidify it, we can only consolidate it. And you know, with the presentation of the paper on the Peace Commission by Professor David Francis to His Excellency the President, that has also received the favorable consideration and action of His Excellency the President. Recently he met with heads of political parties. He is doing all of that to make a sufficient indication of commitment to cohesion. And we can only continue to call on, heads of other political parties and civil society and ordinary Sierra Leoneans, that all of us come together and see ourselves as members of one society, members of one Sierra Leone. So in terms of cohesion, in terms of peace, in terms of unity, those issues will always define a Julius Maada Bio presidency. And some of us, as his able lieutenants, would support him in that direction. And we call on others who may have been fanning the embers, of tribalism, regionalism, partisan politics, to know that, this is the time for development. And all of us just have to join hands together and ensure that this country moves forward. So with respect to transparency and accountability, as you said, other important clusters and sub-clusters in the NDP, yes, President Bio is committed to transparency and accountability. Why is it that Francis Ben Kaifala is producing so much? It's because, fundamentally, the presidency does not interfere with the operational independence of the ACC. And if he cannot interfere with the independence of the ACC, he cannot interfere with the judiciary. He will not interfere with the police institution. This is the presidency that we have. And we can only continue to support him because within the framework of transparency and accountability, with the commissions of inquiry, with our scorecard with the MCC from 49% to 71%, and all of that, we believe that the story about Sierra Leone is changing, and the internationals are taking us as a very serious country, as a country that wants to stamp its feet of authority within the framework of transparency and accountability. So yes, we are 1 year in office. If this government has accomplished this in 1 year, it gives us an indication. By the time we get to the second year, to the third year, I think we would have taken giant leaps forward, and we can only call on Sierra Leoneans to support this governance, because this government is genuine and wants to see the story of Sierra Leone change.
Before I say thank you so much for sparing your time, though very crucial for you coming here, Mr. Minister, what will you say to those who are peddling with this information at the ground dry? Any word of hope that things will change as quickly as possible?
Yes, this I will say in Creole. You know, because it's important, Abdurrahman, I hold a public office. I'm the country's Deputy Minister of Information and Communications. It's a public office. I feel privileged holding this office and serving His Excellency the President, and I owe a duty to the nation. So I go one for say to me famble the way they say the ground dry. We don't come out from very difficult situation. We dey in very difficult situation. But this government, they take some steps. This government don't take some decision. We tough for we all. And if the ground dry, as some people they say, it get for dry before it soak. But I want for assure when I say the ground, it go soak. And this government will do everything for make sure say some of the effects they suffer in terms of the economy, we go try for change them. From USA we meet the economy, it be there inside some gutter. It be difficult. We need for take them out of that gutter day. How will they provide resources, for provide light, for provide water, for pay for them picking them fee under the free quality education, provide books, exercise books, textbooks, pay salaries. Now they try for employ about 4,000 people in back in the health sector. All them money then they will they provide them. But at the same time, how they provided resources then they, now so the debt will we don't meet about $1.6 billion for external debt and over $500 million domestic debt. Government also get for they use that money that they for they pay for them debt that they. So if the ground dry now, as a government, we still do it now. But Sierra Leoneans who believe say we are determined people. Let we all just continue for support His Excellency the President. And I believe say very soon we will begin for see a change in our story. Abdurrahman, that is my parting shot for the program.
Thank you so much, Mr. Minister.
It's always a pleasure.
I must congratulate you making it to the studio to actually dilate some of these issues. But all we're looking forward to having you in subsequent edition, engaging you on the deliberation of most of the clusters that embodied the National Development Plan.
Absolutely. It is always my pleasure.
And that's how I draw the curtain in today's edition of the program. Thanks to my studio guest, Solomon Jamiru, Deputy Minister of Information and Communication. Till then, my name is Abdul Rahman Kamal. Have a wonderful day.